Ada Rose's chestnut hair lashed across her face as she ran, her heart pounding like a war drum. Behind her came the snarls and the pounding hooves of wild hogs tearing up the dry Wyoming dirt. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. 6, maybe more, had burst from the brush without warning as she picked flowers near the creek, and now they bore down on her with a fury that turned her blood to ice. Wyoming, Church 78, didn't forgive the careless. She had grown up knowing the dangers of frontier life, but nothing had prepared her for this. Her lungs burned, her skirts bunched tight in her fists, her boots scattering dust with every desperate stride. The bluffs where her family's homestead lay shimmered far in the distance, too far. "Help," she cried, though she knew no one was near enough to hear. Her father and brothers had gone to Laramie for supplies, leaving her with her ailing mother, too weak to come to her aid. The largest hog, a tusked brute with yellow fangs, was closing fast. Ada could hear its wheezing breath, feel the earth quiver under its charge. She'd heard of men gutted by beasts like these, torn apart in seconds. Panic clawed at her chest. She wouldn't outrun them. Then gunfire. One shot cracked the air, then another. She stumbled at the sound, and behind her came a squeal of pain. She didn't dare glance back. Hoofbeats different from the hogs closed in on her right. "Grab my hand," a rough voice barked. Ada turned her head and saw a rider charging alongside, her arm stretched out. The brim of his hat shadowed his face, but she caught a flash of piercing blue eyes. Without thinking, she lunged for him. Their hands locked, and with a strength that stole her breath, he hauled her onto his saddle in a single sweeping motion. She landed sideways in front of him, his arm locked tight around her waist as he spun his horse and bolted away from the danger. "Hold on," he growled near her ear. She clutched his shirt, pressed against the heat of him, her terror giving way to dizzy relief. She stole a glance at her rescuer, lean and hard, jaw rough with days of stubble, a scar cutting across one brow. His shirt was faded, his vest worn, dust-caked on his skin. Every inch of him spoke of trail life. "Thank you," she gasped. "Don't waste breath on it," he cut in, scanning the horizon. "They won't chase us this far. Name's Coulter Hayes." "Ada Rose," she answered, suddenly aware how close their bodies were, how improper it was, and how little that mattered when he'd just saved her life. "Where were you headed?" Miss Rose Coulter asked, as he eased the horse to a steady lope. "My family's homestead," she said, pointing toward the bluffs. "About 3 miles off." Coulter nodded. "Lucky I was passing through. Those hogs been raising hell across this stretch. Been trailing 'em 2 days now." "You hunt wild hogs?" Ada asked, studying him. He didn't look the part of a hunter, but his steady hand and sure seat said he was no ordinary drifter either. "Not usually," Coulter said, a wry grin softening his rugged features. "I ride for the Rocking J out in the Bighorn Basin. My boss Silas Holt sent me to deal with them. They tore up pasture and near crippled 2 fine horses." As they rode, Ada became acutely aware of the press of his chest against her shoulder, the iron band of his arm steady at her waist, the even rise and fall of his breath. The fear that had nearly broken her began to melt into another kind of nervous flutter. "What were you doing out alone?" Coulter finally asked. "Gathering flowers for my mother." Ada murmured, her throat tightening. "She's sick. The doctor says there's little more to be done." "But the flowers make her smile." Coulter's eyes softened. "I'm sorry. Consumption took my ma when I was 15. Sounds like the same shadow." Silence fell between them, not awkward, but heavy with a shared grief. The prairie spread wide and golden beneath the endless sky, and at last the familiar outline of Ada's cabin came into sight. "That's home," she said, pointing. Coulter guided his horse toward it. As they neared, her mother, Pearl Fenwick, stepped into the doorway, frail, but watchful Ada. Pearl's voice, thin but urgent, carried across the yard. "Wild hogs." Mama Ada called back, as Coulter swung down and helped her to the ground, his hand firm at her waist. "This is Mr. Hayes. He saved me." Pearl, little more than skin and bone, but with eyes still sharp, reached a trembling hand toward him. "Thank you for bringing my daughter home safe, Mr. Hayes." Coulter lifted his hat, revealing dark hair curling at his neck. "Ma'am, it was my honor. Your girl's got grit." Ada flushed under his praise. "Please join us for supper," Pearl urged. "It's the least we can offer." Coulter glanced toward the sinking sun. "I ought to get back on those hogs before night." "Stay." Pearl pressed her weak smile, hiding a hint of calculation. "My husband and boys are gone till tomorrow. I'd rest easier with a man under this roof while those beasts roam. There's a bed in the barn." Something in Pearl Fenwick's voice made Ada Rose glance her way. There was a sly glimmer in her mother's tired smile that embarrassed and amused her at once. Even with sickness hollowing her cheeks, Pearl still managed to nudge her daughter toward the cowboy. Fate had dropped on their doorstep. Coulter Hayes studied her mother's request for a beat, then gave a single nod. "I reckon those hogs won't be stirring much once night sets in. If you're sure it's no burden, I'd be obliged for a hot meal and a roof over my head." "No burden at all," Ada said quickly, though her pulse quickened at the thought of him staying. "I'll see to your horse while you wash up. Pump's out by the side." Their fingers brushed as he handed her the reins. "Much obliged, Miss Rose." Leading the chestnut gelding into the barn, Ada's mind spun. Hours earlier, she had been gathering wildflowers for her mother. In the span of moments, she had stared down death, then been lifted onto the saddle of a man whose ice-blue gaze seemed to strip her bare. She slid the saddle free and brushed the gelding's shining coat, listening to her mother's faint cough echo from the cabin. The sound twisted in her chest. Soon those coughs would fade forever, leaving Ada to shoulder the work of holding the family together. "Need a hand?" She turned, startled, to see Coulter framed in the doorway, hat in hand, face clean of dust. He looked younger, without the trail grime, though still older than her by years, and ruggedly handsome in a way that stole her breath. "I've got it," she said quickly, trying to steady her voice. "You've done enough saving for one day?" A grin tugged at his mouth. "Don't sit right letting a lady tend my horse after a scare like that." "This lady grew up onto homestead," Ada countered, brushing firm strokes along the horse's flank. "Been handling horses since I could walk." Coulter chuckled, stepping inside. He stroked the gelding's neck. "Funny. Thunder here don't usually cotton to strangers, but he's taken to you." Thunder. Ada arched a brow. "Named him after the first storm we rode through together." Lightning split a tree close enough to make a man flinch. He stood like he was watching the show. Ada smiled, palm trailing the gelding's warm hide. Brave like his rider. Coulter winked, and heat rushed into her cheeks. She hung up the brush quickly. "I should help Mama with supper. Make yourself comfortable, Mr. Hayes." "Coulter," he corrected softly. "After sharing a saddle seems foolish to stand on ceremony." Her eyes met his, catching a warmth there that rattled her more than the hogs had. "Coulter," then she whispered. Dinner was simple. Frontier fare. Rabbit stew she had set, simmering that morning, cornbread made with the last of the meal, and a jar of berry preserves saved from summer. Pearl sat at the table, but barely ate her eyes alight as she asked question after question of their guest. "Where are you from originally, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, fingers trembling around a cup of tea. "Virginia, ma'am," Coulter answered. "My father had a small farm there. After the war, nothing much was left. He passed a few years later. My brother took the land and I rode west to start new. The war stole plenty, Pearl said softly. My husband Virgil Kane fought too. He rarely speaks of it. Ada noticed Coulter's jaw tighten at the mention. He would have been young at the war's end, yet its shadows still clung to him. How long have you been in Wyoming territory? Ada asked gently. Close to 5 years, he said, his shoulders easing. Started as a trail hand driving cattle up from Texas. Worked my way up till Silas Holt trusted me with more. One day I aimed to run cattle on my own land. Pearl nodded approval, softening her eyes. A worthy ambition. A man ought to own a spread of his own. Ada caught her mother's glance, pointed knowing. She resisted the urge to sigh. Pearl had dropped hints about marriage since her 20th birthday, and now here was a cowboy who had pulled Ada from death's grasp, straight out of a dime novel. After the meal, Pearl retired early, worn thin from sitting at the table. Ada cleared dishes while Coulter carried in firewood and filled the water bucket without being asked. When the chores were done, they settled on the porch as the last streaks of light melted into the horizon. Stars pricked the vast Wyoming sky, the night air cool and laced with sage. Your mama's strong, Coulter said quietly. She is, Ada answered, her throat tight. She's carried us through everything our journey west building this place the winters, all of it. I don't know how we'll go on without her. Ada Rose's voice broke in the quiet, her gaze fixed on the stars. Coulter Hayes's hand found hers in the dark, a steady, wordless comfort. You'll keep going, he said, gently squeezing her fingers. Because that's what she raised you to do, and every time you see wildflowers you'll think of her. Tears burned Ada's eyes. You talk like you've walked that road yourself. Coulter's voice dropped low. Loss has a way of teaching. Teaches you what matters and who matters. Their eyes locked in the dim glow spilling from the cabin window. For a heartbeat, Ada felt something shift, an understanding, a possibility she hadn't expected. She thought he might lean closer, close that breath of space between them. Instead, Coulter released her hand and rose. I'd best turn in if I'm to get an early start on those hogs. Ada nodded, her heart tight with both relief and disappointment. Of course. Extra blankets are in the chest at the barn. Nights can bite cold. Thank you, Miss Rose. And for your company tonight, he said, setting his hat back on. Good night, Coulter, she whispered. Good night, Ada. She watched his tall frame fade into the starlight, wondering what twist of fate had brought him here. Tomorrow he'd hunt those hogs, then ride back to Rocking J and his own life. She would return to her mother's care, waiting for Virgil Kane and her brothers to return, carrying the endless burden of frontier survival. And yet something told her this wasn't the last time Coulter Hayes would ride her way. With that fragile hope, Ada went inside to check on Pearl Fenwick before seeking her bed. Morning came with thin rays creeping through her window. She dressed quickly in a plain work dress, pinned her hair, and moved quietly, not waking her mother, whose breathing remained shallow but steady. She built the fire, set coffee to boil. Outside, she found Coulter already saddled with purpose. His face was freshly shaved, clothes neat despite the wear. You're up early, she said, warmth surprising her voice. Always been that way, he smiled. Comes with working cattle. Checked your fence line at first light, it'll hold. Though hogs can be stubborn. Ada's heart softened. Would you care for some coffee before you ride? I wouldn't turn it down. They sat together at the small table, steam rising from their cups in the cool dawn. To Ada, the simple act of sharing coffee with him felt oddly significant, like the beginning of a ritual she hadn't known she needed. What will you do after the hogs? She asked softly. Coulter's blue eyes turned thoughtful. Head back to Rocking J. Silas Holt's herd needs moving to winter pasture soon. He paused, gaze steady on her. Though truth be told, I reckon I might find reason to pass through here again, if that'd be welcome. Ada felt warmth spread in her chest. It would. A cough from Pearl's room tugged Ada back to duty. She rose, setting down her cup. I should see to Mama. Her days come and go, Coulter nodded. I won't keep you. Thank you for the coffee and the kindness. He set his hat on, ready to ride. Ada walked him to the door, reluctant to let him go. Be careful with those hogs. They're meaner than they look. I will, Coulter promised. His hand brushed hers, steady and sure. Take care of yourself, too. Ada rose. Your mama ain't the only one needing you strong. Before she could answer, hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Ada stepped onto the porch. Dust rose 3 riders cutting toward the cabin. That's Pa and my brothers, she said, recognizing them even at a distance. They weren't due till afternoon. Coulter stepped back, releasing her hand with a quiet respect. Virgil Kane, tall and weathered by years under the sun, reined in first. His sharp eyes took in the scene, his daughter standing with a stranger, the man's horse saddled and ready. Ada, he called, voice edged with curiosity. Pa, she answered, stepping forward. This is Mr. Coulter Hayes. He rides for the Rocking J Ranch. Yesterday I was chased by Hogs and he saved me. Mama asked him to stay the night. Virgil dismounted, followed by Ephraim Doolin, serious and stern at 24, and Zeke Hollis, 19, restless as the wind. Both cast wary eyes on the newcomer. Mr. Hayes, Virgil said, extending his hand. Seems we owe you our thanks. Coulter took the hand firmly. No need for thanks, sir. Any man would have done the same. Not every man could have managed that, Virgil Kane said, his sharp eyes measuring the younger cowboy. Those hogs have been tearing up land clear across 3 counties. You said you ride for the Rocking J. Yes, sir, Coulter, Hayes answered. Silas Holt sent me after him when they rooted up pasture and crippled a couple of horses. Virgil gave a short nod, satisfied. Holt's a solid man. Done dealings with him before. Ada Rose watched the exchange, noting the way Coulter stood respectful, but not bowing his head, meeting her father's gaze without flinching. He carried himself with quiet ease, the kind that belonged to men sure of who they were. Mr. Hayes was about to leave and pick up the trail again, Ada said. Alone? Ephraim Doolin asked, frowning. That's work for more than one set of hands. Coulter shrugged. I've tracked worse with less help. Virgil studied him a long moment before turning to his sons. Unload the supplies. See to the horses, then fetch your rifles. He faced Coulter again. If you can wait an hour, you'll have company. Those hogs nearly took my daughter. I aim to settle the score. Something like relief flickered in Coulter's eyes, though his face stayed calm. I'd be glad for the company, Mr. Kane. Local knowledge will make the trail easier. Good. Virgil's voice was final. Aid attend to your mother. We brought medicine from town. The doc said it might ease her lungs. While Ephraim and Zeke Hollis started hauling gear, Coulter stepped close to Ada, speaking low. I'll be back when it's done. It wasn't a question, and Ada didn't treat it as one. I'll have supper waiting, she said softly. He gave her a quick, warm smile. Something worth coming back for, then. She watched as he joined her brothers, his movements easy as he introduced himself proper. There was something about the way he fit in alongside them, like he belonged there all along. Inside, Pearl Fenwick was awake, propped up on pillows. Her thin hand gripped Ada's. Was that your father I heard? Yes, Mama. They're back early. Pa brought medicine from the town doctor. Pearl nodded, then gave a faint, knowing smile. And is that cowboy still here? Ada flushed. He's not my cowboy, Mama. Not yet, Pearl murmured, with a spark of her old humor. But I saw how he looked at you, and how you looked back. A mother knows. He's riding out with Pa and the boys to hunt the hogs, Ada said, trying to shift the subject. He promised he'd return. Pearl squeezed her hand weakly. Good. I like him. He's got kind eyes, strong hands. A woman could do worse. Mama Ada protested, though a smile tugged at her lips. I've known him less than a day. Sometimes that's all it takes. Pearl whispered, her gaze drifting. I knew your father was the one the moment he helped me up outside a store in Virginia. Sometimes fate just throws the right man in your path or pulls you up onto his saddle. Ada laughed in spite of herself. We'll see, Mama. Now, let me brew that tea and try the new tonic Pa brought. From outside, the sound of men's voices carried in her father's deep command, her brother's quicker replies, and Coulter's steady tones blending in. Ada's heart worried for them all. Hogs were mean and unpredictable, but at least they'd be together, watching each other's backs. By the time she returned to the porch, the men were mounted and ready to ride. Coulter tipped his hat, his eyes catching hers with a promise that warmed her clear through. Virgil gave her a grave nod, while Ephraim and Zeke waved as they turned toward the creek where the beasts had been seen. Ada watched until the riders vanished over the ridge, her chest tight with a tangle of emotions, fear for their safety, hope for their return, and beneath it all, a stirring feeling for the blue-eyed cowboy who had ridden so unexpectedly into her life. The day stretched long, filled with chores, feeding chickens, tending the garden, minding her mother. Yet Ada's thoughts drifted back to Coulter again and again. He was brave, he'd proven that. He was kind shown in the way he spoke to Pearl. There was depth in his gaze, the kind of look shaped by hardship and dreams a woman longed to understand. As dusk drew near, Ada stirred a hearty stew, praying the men would return hungry and in one piece. Pearl dozed, her breathing eased by the new medicine, though Ada knew it was no cure. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. She hurried outside, heart thumping to see 4 riders coming fast. Relief washed through her as she counted each one. Virgil, Ephraim, Zeke, and Coulter, all alive. Their clothes were spattered with mud and blood-stained Zeke's sleeve, but it looked no worse than a shallow cut. Behind Ephraim, Doolin's horse dragged the hulking carcass of a boar. You got them, Ada Rose called as the riders came into view. Virgil Kane swung down, his face lined with fatigue, but carrying a grim sort of pride. Dropped the big one, and 2 more. The rest broke off. They won't trouble this valley again. Coulter Hayes slid stiffly from Thunder, his movements betraying the toll of the day's fight. Your pa's a dead shot, he said, stepping toward Ada. And your brothers know this country like it's etched into their hands. Made my work easy. Zeke caught a scratch, Virgil said, nodding to his youngest. Nothing bad, but see it tended. Come in, all of you, Ada urged. Stew's nearly ready, and I'll clean that cut. The men filed inside, bringing with them the scent of sweat gunpowder and prairie dust. Ada gathered clean cloths and the bottle of whiskey her father kept for such hurts, while the men washed at the pump. Zeke winced as she dabbed the long tusk mark along his arm. You're lucky it's not worse, she scolded softly, smearing a salve Pearl Fenwick had prepared. You should have seen Coulter, Zeke said with boyish pride. That boar came at him full tilt. He didn't budge, just waited till it was near enough to feel its breath, then dropped it with one shot clean between the eyes. Ada glanced toward Coulter, who was seated at the table speaking in low tones with Virgil. Man's got iron nerves, Zeke added. Pa was impressed too, though he'll never admit it. High praise indeed. Virgil Kane didn't hand out respect lightly, least of all to outsiders. Ada finished wrapping Zeke's arm, then turned back to the stew, slipping dumplings into the bubbling pot. Pearl came from her room shawl draped over thin shoulders. Virgil was at her side in an instant, his hard features softening as he helped her into a chair. "You should be resting," he murmured, though without true rebuke. "I've rested enough," Pearl said. "I wanted to hear the tale and sit with our guest while I'm able." Her words hung heavy, a reminder to them all that her days were numbered. Despite that shadow supper carried a kind of warmth. The men relived the hunt, each voice adding color to the story. Coulter folded into their circle with ease, deferring to Virgil when due laughing at Zeke's tall tales, listening to Ephraim's steady recounting. What struck Ada most was how he drew her mother into the talk, looking at Pearl, when he spoke, answering her questions as though she were still the family's anchor. It was a kindness that told Ada more than any boast. Afterward, as Ada cleared dishes, Pearl beckoned Coulter close. "Mr. Hayes," she said, voice thin but steady, "I thank you for saving my daughter. Out here, a moment's hesitation can cost a life." "You didn't hesitate." Coulter ducked his head uneasy with the praise. "As I told Mr. Kane, any man would have done the same." Perhaps Pearl said softly, "But not every man would have succeeded. Ada is our only daughter, the heart that holds us together. What you gave us was more than her life." Ada's hands stilled at her mother's words. She caught Coulter's glance in the lamplight, his expression unreadable. "She strikes me as the sort who'd have found a way," Coulter said quietly. "Still, I'm glad I was there." Virgil, puffing on his pipe, spoke from the hearth. "Silas Holt will expect you back at Rocking J." "Yes, sir," Coulter answered. "Though I finished what he sent me for." Virgil exhaled thoughtfully. "Harvest's coming, and we're short-handed. Could use another back in the field for a week or two, if Holt can spare you. Pay won't be much, but there's food and a bed." Ada nearly dropped the plate she was drying. Virgil rarely invited strangers into his home or work. The offer itself was a testament to what he thought of Coulter. Coulter seemed just as surprised, though he masked it well. "That's generous, Mr. Kane. I'll need to ride back and clear it with Silas, but I reckon he'd oblige neighbor to neighbor." "Good," Virgil said firmly. "You can go in the morning. Return once it's settled." Across the room, Ada met Pearl's eye and saw the quiet satisfaction there. Somehow her mother had a hand in this, though Ada couldn't fathom how she'd swayed Virgil. Perhaps he'd seen what Pearl had, that there was something rare growing between his daughter and this cowboy. Later, as the house settled, Ada stepped onto the porch with Coulter once more. Stars spilled bright across the sky, the air cool and sweet. "Your father's offer caught me off guard," Coulter said. "For me too," Ada admitted. "He doesn't open doors to strangers easily." Coulter smiled, the glow from the cabin lighting his face. "And you, Ada Rose, do you warm to strangers quickly?" The words carried more weight than the playful tone suggested. Ada held his gaze. "Not often," she said at last. "But then again, not many strangers have pulled me onto their saddle with Hogs charging at my back." "That kind of thing forges a bond," Coulter Hayes said with a low laugh, the sound warm in the hush of night. He stepped closer, and Ada Rose felt her breath catch her heartbeat quickening, as if she were facing down Hogs again, but this time it was for reasons far different. Coulter lifted a hand and brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. His touch, feather light. "I'll be back," he promised, voice hushed. "Not only because your father offered me work, but because there's something here I haven't found anywhere else." "And what's that?" Ada whispered, barely able to form the words with him so near. "A beginning," Coulter said simply. Then, with a restraint that both steadied and unsettled her, he stepped back, keeping a respectful distance. "Good night, Ada Rose. I'll see you in a few days." "Good night, Coulter," she answered softly, watching as he walked toward the barn for another night beneath their roof. Sleep came hard for her. Dreams tangled together, tusks crashing toward her hooves, pounding, and those blue eyes that seemed to read her soul. Dawn found her already awake, pulling on a plain work dress and pinning her hair before heading to the kitchen. Coulter was there ahead of her, hat in hand, speaking quietly with Virgil Kane. Both men turned as she entered, and something in Coulter's look made her pulse jump. Morning she greeted, busying herself with the coffee pot to hide the warmth in her cheeks. Mr. Hayes is riding out, Virgil told her, though she hardly needed telling. He'll be back in 3 days or so, depending on what Silas Holt says. Ada nodded, pouring steaming cups. Safe travels, then. Virgil accepted his mug with a word of thanks, before stepping away to check on Pearl Fenwick, leaving Ada alone with Coulter. I meant what I said last night, Coulter told her, his tone steady now that her father was gone. I'm coming back. Ada met his gaze without wavering. I believe you. Something unspoken passed between them, then a promise, a chance. Coulter set his empty cup aside and reached for his hat. 3 days, he said with a crooked smile. Try not to get chased by any more wild beasts while I'm gone. Ada laughed lightly. No promises. This is Wyoming. His grin flashed quick and sure, then he tipped his hat, and was gone, the sound of Thunder's hooves fading into the wide morning as she stood in the doorway, watching him ride out. The next 3 days dragged unbearably slow. She worked alongside Ephraim Doolin and Zeke Hollis in the fields, tended to Pearl put up vegetables from the garden. Yet her thoughts strayed again and again to Coulter. Would he truly return? Would Silas Holt release him? Was what she felt real, or just the spark of a dramatic rescue? On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as she pegged laundry on the line, her youngest brother's shout carried across the yard. Rider comin'! Ada's heart leapt, though she forced herself to move calmly, pinning one last sheet as her eyes fixed on the horizon. Slowly the figure drew closer, a chestnut horse loping steady across the prairie, the rider tall in the saddle. Coulter Hayes had come back. Ada smoothed her apron and walked to the front of the cabin, every fiber of her wanting to run, but pride and the knowledge of her family's eyes held her to measured steps. Coulter swung down as he reached the yard, leading Thunder toward her with a smile that lit his whole face. Miss Rose, he greeted, tipping his hat. Mr. Hayes, she returned, unable to keep her own smile hidden. Looks like you made it back in one piece. As promised, he said. Silas Holt sends his regards to your father, and he's sparing me for 2 weeks, maybe 3, depending how things run at the Rocking J. Ada's heart soared, though her voice stayed even. Pa will be glad. There's plenty here to keep you busy with harvest coming in. Coulter's gaze lingered on her. Brought you something, he said, pulling a small package from his saddlebag. You didn't need to, she started. I wanted to, he cut in gently. Go on, open it. She undid the string and peeled back the brown paper to reveal a small volume. Tennyson's poetry, its leather binding worn but sound. It's beautiful, she whispered, running her fingers over the pages. Thank you. Came all the way from Boston, Coulter explained. Figured you might like something for the long winter nights. The gift touched her deeply. Books were rare out here, and he'd chosen one to feed her heart rather than her hands. I'll treasure it, she said, holding it close. Just then, Virgil Kane stepped out of the barn, nodding in greeting. Hayes, good to see you back. Holt gave his say-so. Then, yes, sir, Coulter replied, shifting his attention toward her father. Said he could spare me at least 2 weeks, maybe longer. Good, Virgil Kane replied, his tone all business. We're bringing in the Westfield tomorrow. You can bunk in the barn again. Ephraim will show you where things are." Ada Rose watched as her father led Coulter Hayes toward the field, already discussing the work ahead. The cowboy cast a quick glance back, a smile, just for her before turning to listen to Virgil's steady instructions. That evening, Coulter joined them for supper, settling in the same chair he had taken before. Conversation flowed easily, centered mostly on the harvest and what work lay ahead. Ada noticed how Ephraim Doolin and Zeke Hollis already treated him like one of their own, weaving him naturally into their talk and plans. Pearl Fenwick observed the scene with bright, knowing eyes. Every so often her gaze flicked toward Ada with a glimmer of quiet approval. Ada had no doubt her mother had already weighed the man in her heart and found him worthy, strong, steady, kind, with a gentleness beneath his ruggedness. Later, when the house quieted, Ada and Coulter found themselves out on the porch again. The night was soft crickets rising in chorus from the grass. "How's your mother?" Coulter asked, voice low and sincere. Ada let out a slow breath. "No better, no worse. The new tonic eases the pain, but we all know. It's only a matter of time." She paused, then added quietly, "She likes you, you know." Coulter's smile was faint but real. "I'm glad. I like her too. Reminds me of my own ma, strong even when she was weak." "What was she like?" Ada asked, realizing how little she truly knew about his past, despite the bond she felt growing between them. Coulter was quiet for a spell, then spoke. "She was beautiful, not like fancy ladies in Richmond, but in her own way. Dark hair, green eyes, sharp enough to catch any lie. Worked sunup to sundown and still read to me and my brother every night." "She sounds wonderful," Ada said softly. "She was." Coulter agreed. "She held us together during the war when my father was gone fighting. Fed us somehow, though Lord knows how she managed it. When the consumption took her, it was like the light went out of the house. My father never recovered. War had already scarred him, but losing her broke him clean." Without thinking, Ada laid her hand over his on the porch rail. "I'm sorry." Coulter turned his hand, clasping hers, his warmth steady even in sorrow. "It was long ago, but it taught me something. Life's short. You take joy where you find it, because tomorrow isn't promised." His eyes caught hers in the dusk, and Ada felt the truth settle into her bones. Her mother was slipping away. Life here was cruel more often than kind. But with Coulter's hand around hers and the stars wheeling overhead, she felt a joy that cut through the darkness. "I've been thinking," Coulter said after a beat, his voice turning more serious. "After harvest, I'll have to ride back to the Rocking J. I owe Silas Holt my word, but if you'd welcome it, I'd like to come back, not just to visit." Ada's heart quickened. And for what purpose? Coulter's grip tightened slightly. "To court you proper, Ada Rose, with your father's blessing and the way your mother would expect it." Her heart fluttered, but her voice held steady. "I'd welcome that. Very much." Coulter's answering smile was like sunrise spilling across the prairie. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he lifted his free hand to cup her cheek. The kiss he placed on her lips was gentle, reverent, a promise more than a claim. Ada had been kissed before, clumsy pecks from farm boys after church. This was different. This reached past the surface into something deeper, something that stirred her very soul. When they parted, Coulter rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm in the cool night. "I've wanted to do that since I pulled you up on Thunder's back," he confessed. Ada laughed softly, her joy bubbling over. "Even with Hogs charging and me covered in dust." "Especially then," Coulter replied, his grin plain in his voice. "You were fierce. Alive. I knew you were someone rare, The cabin door creaked open, and they sprang apart, though their flushed faces spoke louder than words. Zeke Hollis stood there oblivious, as only a 19-year-old could be. Pa says check the irrigation channel by the west field before it's too dark. I'll come, Coulter said, easily straightening. Best to be ready for morning. As he followed Zeke across the yard, Coulter looked back, once his eyes carrying a promise that sent warmth flooding through Ada, despite the cool air. She touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss, and knew her life had changed forever, from that moment on the Wyoming prairie. The harvest settled into a steady rhythm, long days beneath the sun, sweat on brows, hands rough from labor. Coulter Hayes slipped into the Kane family's routine, as if he'd always belonged. He rose with Virgil Kane and the boys before dawn, worked the rows shoulder to shoulder with Ephraim Doolin and Zeke Hollis, and joined the circle each evening as the prairie cooled. Ada Rose watched him closely. She saw how he followed her father's lead without argument, how he offered his own knowledge when it fit, how he ribbed Zeke with good-natured teasing and held long, serious talks with Ephraim as equals. He earned their respect the same way he had earned hers, through quiet strength, steady hands, and an honest manner. But the moments Ada treasured most were the stolen ones, walking with Coulter to the chicken coop, riding side by side to deliver produce, or sitting close on the porch while the night hummed with crickets. In those breaths of time, they spoke of pasts and futures, of books and place, or said nothing at all, just letting silence draw them closer. Pearl Fenwick encouraged it, though her matchmaking was less than subtle. She would send Ada to wash linens at the creek, knowing Coulter was watering the horses, or ask them both to gather vegetables when any one of the men could have done it. Ada saw through the ruse, but her heart swelled with gratitude. A week into Coulter's stay, Ada was kneading bread when Pearl came to the kitchen, leaning heavy on her stick. She lowered herself into a chair, eyes bright, despite the shadow of sickness. "He's a good man," she said simply. Ada didn't pretend confusion. "Yes, he is. Your father thinks so too," Pearl went on, though he'd never say it plain. "He's impressed with how Coulter works, how he respects the land." Ada's hands stilled. Pa approves. Pearl's tired smile carried a spark of mischief. "Approves enough that when Coulter asked to court you proper, your father didn't run him off with his shotgun." Ada's breath caught. He already asked yesterday, Pearl confirmed. Did it right, asked for a private word, laid out his intentions, clear, promised he could provide. Your father listened, then agreed, though he said any engagement would wait until you'd had time. Warmth flooded Ada's chest. "And Pa said yes." Pearl nodded. "Yes, with the understanding you'll wait," which, given his usual glower at any man who looks your way twice, is more than generous. Ada laughed softly, kneading with new energy. "I suppose I should be grateful he didn't demand a year." Pearl's voice gentled. "He sees how you two look at one another, and he knows life's too short for unnecessary waiting. I won't be here to see you wed Ada, but it eases me to know you won't be left alone." Ada left the dough and knelt beside her mother, taking her thin hands. "Mama, don't—" "I do know," Pearl cut in softly. "And so do you. What matters now is your future. Coulter Hayes can give you that." Tears burned Ada's eyes. "I think so too," she whispered. Pearl stroked her hair. "Then that's settled. Now help me up. I'd like the porch while the sun's still warm. And don't forget your bread, we'd all starve without you." That evening the family gathered again. Virgil Kane was uncharacteristically talkative, asking Coulter about his cattle work and his plans ahead. Ephraim and Zeke traded glances, clearly aware of Coulter's request. Later, Ada and Coulter took their usual place on the porch. She turned to him with raised brows. "Were you planning to tell me you asked my father for permission to court me?" Coulter looked faintly abashed. I meant to tell you tonight. I wanted to do it right out of respect for your father." Ada smiled despite herself. "Mama already told me. She's pleased. And you, Coulter, are you pleased?" He grew serious. "What about you, Ada?" She slipped her hand into his. "Very pleased, though Pa says we wait 6 months before any engagement." Coulter nodded, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. 6 months isn't so long. It'll give us time to know each other in every season. You'll be back at the Rocking J," Ada reminded him, worry edging her voice. "I'll ride over every chance I get," Coulter promised. "It's not so far. Besides, your father mentioned Clyde Rourke's place might be for sale come spring. Good land with water and pasture enough." Ada's heart jumped. "You're thinking of buying it," Coulter met her eyes. "I've saved near everything I earned these past years. It'd be modest at first, small herd, some crops, but it'd be ours. And close to your kin. Close to you." The weight of his words stole her breath. He wasn't just speaking of courtship, he was speaking of a life, a future. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said at last. Her voice low but steady. Coulter's smile glowed even in the dark, and Ada felt her world tilting toward something new, something lasting. "Then that's what I'll work for, Coulter," Hayes said quietly. "A place we can call our own, close enough to lend your pa a hand, but ours all the same." He leaned in, and Ada Rose met him halfway, her lips carrying all the hope she had barely dared to imagine before this cowboy thundered into her life and turned it upside down. The days that followed carried a golden hue, golden like the wheat they hauled in Golden, like the late summer sun spilling across the plains, golden, like the fragile hope that filled Ada's chest, even as Pearl Fenwick's health waned. Coulter worked from first light till nightfall, his sweat and grit proving his worth, not just to Ada, but to Virgil Kane and her brothers as well. When the day's labor was finally done, Coulter often read aloud from the worn book of Tennyson he had given her. Those evenings became sacred. Even Virgil, usually tight-lipped, would set his pipe aside to listen, while Pearl's thin face glowed with a spark of life as Coulter's deep voice carried poetry through the cabin's walls. One night, after he finished reading Ulysses, its final vow to strive to seek to find and not yield Pearl, reached for Ada's hand. "That's how you must live," she whispered, breath faint against the firelight. "Never yield to despair. Always seek. Always strive." Ada's throat closed with emotion. "I will, Mama. I promise." But before dawn, Virgil's urgent voice called her from sleep. Ada knew before her feet even touched the floor. Pearl Fenwick had slipped away peacefully in the night. Her battle for breath ended at last. Her face was serene, lit softly by the lamplight Virgil had placed at her bedside. The days blurred after that grief woven with duty. Neighbors rode in from miles away, bearing food, offering hands for the harvest. They laid Pearl to rest in a plain pine box, the Wyoming earth receiving her with the solemn dignity she deserved. Through it all, Coulter stood by Ada. He was steady, never overbearing, always there when she needed him, and giving space when she needed to weep alone. He sent word to Silas Holt at the Rocking J, asking for time, and stayed to finish the harvest Pearl had begged them to complete. A week later, Ada stood at her mother's grave, laying the last wild flowers of the season across the fresh mound of earth. She felt him before she saw him, Coulter hat in hand, stopping a respectful distance away until she turned. She managed a fragile smile through her tears. "She would have loved hearing you read to her," Ada said softly. "It meant more than you know." Coulter stepped closer, his eyes gentle. "She was a remarkable woman. I wish I'd known her longer. She trusted you'd look after me," Ada murmured. That gave her peace. Coulter took her hand, his grip steady. "I will, Ada Rose. For as long as you'll have me." They stood in silence, prairie grass whispering in the wind, the endless Wyoming sky stretching blue above them. Finally, he spoke. "I have to ride back tomorrow. Silas has been patient, but I swore I'd return for the cattle drive." Ada nodded. She had known this was coming. "When will I see you again?" 3 weeks, Coulter promised. "Once the herd's moved to winter pasture. Then I'll ride here straight away." He hesitated, then added, "I've spoken to Clyde Rourke. He's willing to hold his place for me till spring, if I can put a deposit down next month." A true smile broke through Ada's grief. "You're really going to buy it?" "If it's what you want," Coulter said, his gaze fierce but tender. "This is about us, Ada. I won't push you, not when you're mourning." She touched his face, her heart breaking and healing at once. "Mama's last wish was for me to be happy, and nothing would make me happier than building a life with you, Coulter Hayes." Their kiss by Pearl's grave carried the weight of promise love tempered by loss, a vow to carve out a future together in the hard but beautiful land Pearl had loved. The next morning, Ada watched from the porch as Coulter saddled Thunder. Virgil and the boys had already given their thanks and farewells, leaving only the two of them in the early light. 3 weeks, Ada repeated, fixing every detail of him into her memory. 3 weeks, he confirmed, settling his hat. "I'll write if I find a rider heading this way, and I'll be thinking of you every day." Ada reached to straighten his collar, the small, intimate act feeling like a quiet claim. "Be careful on the trail. Cattle can turn mean quick." "So can wild hogs," Coulter said with a grin. "But you saw how that ended." Ada laughed, the sound startling in her grief. "I suppose I should thank those beasts for driving me straight into your arms." "I know I do," Coulter answered softly. He bent to kiss her once more, then swung into the saddle. Thunder's hooves striking steady against the dirt. "Take care of yourself, Ada Rose. I'll be back before you know it." She stood on the porch, long after he faded into the horizon, her heart a tangle of sorrow and hope. 3 weeks stretched ahead like a lifetime, but within her was a new certainty. They had a future worth waiting for. Ada Rose threw herself into the endless tasks of preparing for winter, putting up the last jars of garden produce, patching worn clothes, helping Virgil Kane and her brothers mend fences and roofs before the snows came. At night, when the fire glowed low, she often reached for the poetry book Coulter Hayes had given her, letting the words carry her back to those golden days of harvest when he had read aloud with such steady warmth. Virgil grew quieter after Pearl Fenwick's passing, but sometimes Ada caught his gaze softening when it lingered on her. One evening, as the fire crackled, he startled her by speaking Coulter's name. "Hayes is a good man." He said the words rough-edged, as though unfamiliar on his tongue. "He works hard, keeps his mouth shut, unless it's worth speaking, and he knows livestock as well as land." "Yes, Pa," Ada answered, setting aside her mending to meet his eyes. Virgil nodded. "Your ma said he had kind eyes. She was right as usual." His voice thinned at the last words, and Ada felt tears sting hearing that rare admission of her mother's wisdom. "She was right about most things," Ada whispered. Virgil puffed his pipe, then said, "Clyde Rourke came by today. Hayes sent word about buying his place come spring. Wanted to know if I had any objection to having him for a neighbor." Ada's pulse quickened. "And what did you tell him Virgil took his time answering? Told him I'd rather see Hayes working that land than some greenhorn from back east who don't know which end of a cow kicks. And," he gave her a fleeting smile, "told him I'd be glad to have my daughter close by once she's wed." Ada crossed the room, knelt at his chair, and wrapped her hands around his weathered one. "Thank you, Pa." He squeezed her fingers with an awkward gentleness. "Your ma would want you happy." So do I. Exactly 3 weeks after Coulter's departure, Ada was gathering eggs when the sound of hoofbeats pricked her ears. She knew the rhythm of Thunder's gait before she even looked up. Dropping her basket into the grass, she ran propriety, forgotten her heart hammering with relief. Coulter swung down before she reached him, catching her in his arms. They clung to each other, weeks of absence melting away in a single embrace. "You're here," Ada breathed, drawing back to search his face. He looked thinner, his skin bronzed by weather and hardship, but his blue eyes shone the same. "As promised," Coulter said with a weary grin. "Drove the herd to winter pasture, lost little, though we rode through an early snow in the high country." Ada's eyes narrowed at the cut along his jaw. She touched it with gentle fingers. And this Coulter caught her hand, kissing her palm. Just a quarrel with a low-hanging branch. Nothing more. She suspected the truth was rougher than that, but let it go. Joy outshone worry. "Come inside. Pa and the boys will want to hear every detail. I baked apple pie." As they walked, his hand found hers, their fingers locking naturally, as though they'd always fit that way. "I spoke with Rourke again," Coulter said. "It's settled for spring. Left him a deposit. And Silas Holt gave me his blessing, said I could take a few head as a starting herd." Ada squeezed his hand. "It's really happening then. You'll have your land, we'll have our land," he corrected softly, stopping her with his gaze. Ada's throat tightened. "I want that more than anything." Through the winter, Coulter divided his time 2 weeks at the Rocking J, then riding over to spend 3 or 4 days at the Kane place. He chopped wood, hunted, patched storm-broken fences, sharing whatever strength the homestead needed. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading Dreaming, or simply resting side by side after long days. Sometimes when Virgil and the boys were occupied, he and Ada shared moments more tender, kisses, deepened embraces that left them both aching for the day when waiting would no longer be required. Christmas came their first without Pearl. Ada strung pine boughs and set handmade ornaments, keeping her mother's traditions alive. That night Coulter rode in through drifting snow, with gifts a sturdy strap for Virgil, hunting knives for Ephraim and Zeke. For Ada, he brought a simple silver ring. "It's not an engagement ring," he said, slipping it onto her right hand, careful to honor Virgil's 6-month demand. His voice softened. "Not yet. But it's a promise that when the time comes, I'll have one for your left hand." Ada Rose cherished the silver ring Coulter Hayes had given her not for its value, but for the vow it carried. She wore it proudly through the long winter, and as spring began to stir across the Wyoming prairie, her heart swelled with hope. The 6 months Virgil Kane had demanded slipped by each one, marked by Coulter's steady devotion and his growing place within her family. On a soft April morning, when the first wildflowers peeked through the grass, Coulter rode up with a wagon trailing behind Silas Holt himself, holding the reins. The wagon was piled high with furniture, tools, and supplies. "Figured you could use a hand getting settled," Silas said with a grin as they unloaded. "Call it a wedding present if that's where this is headed." Coulter clasped his old employer's hand. "It is if the lady will have me." Silas tipped his hat toward Ada, who had come to help. "Judging by that look in her eyes, I'd say you've already got your answer." Ada flushed, but didn't protest. She had been waiting for this moment since Coulter's letter announcing the land was his. Now, watching him stand on soil that would be their home, joy bubbled inside her. The cabin on Clyde Rourke's place was modest, but well kept. With Silas's unexpected gifts, a bed, a sturdy table and chairs, a rocking chair and kitchenware, it felt like a true home by sundown. After Silas rode off, Coulter led Ada on a walk as the sky burned gold and rose so like the harvest evenings when they'd first fallen for each other. "It'll take work," Coulter admitted, eyeing the fences that needed mending, the fields begging to be planted, the barn in need of paint. "But it's ours or it will be." Ada tightened her hold on his hand. "I already love it." At the creek that split his land from her father's Coulter stopped facing her square. "6 months have passed," he said simply. "They have," she whispered, heart pounding. "I spoke with your pa this morning. Asked him straight out for your hand." Ada searched his eyes. "And what did he say?" Coulter's smile was slow, full of relief. "Said it was high time I made an honest woman of you, considering I've been riding over here half the year." His tone turned solemn as he pulled a small box from his pocket. "Ada Rose, from the moment I hauled you onto my saddle with those hogs on our heels, I knew you were different. These months have proved what I felt that day. You're the one I want beside me for every trial and triumph this land throws our way." He opened the box, the fading sun catching on a simple gold band set with a modest diamond. "Will you marry me?" Ada didn't hesitate. "Yes. Yes, Coulter. Hayes, I will." He slid the ring onto her left hand, where it nestled against the silver promise ring on her right. Then his arms closed around her, his kiss speaking all the love and devotion words couldn't capture. As they walked back beneath a sky deepening with stars, Ada thought of Pearl Fenwick. Her absence ached, but no longer hollowed her out. "Mama would have been overjoyed," she said softly. Coulter's arm drew her closer. "I like to believe she knows that she's watching." "I think so too," Ada whispered, comforted. Their wedding came in June, the prairie blazing with wildflowers that Pearl would have adored. Ada wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to her frame, with a crown of fresh blooms woven through her hair. Coulter stood tall in a new suit, his hat traded for something more formal, though Ephraim Doolin teased him for it all day. They wed beneath the open sky, halfway between the Kane homestead and their new cabin. Neighbors from miles around gathered. Virgil gave his daughter away with a pride that couldn't hide his tears, while Silas Holt stood as Coulter's best man. Afterward came music, laughter, dancing, and a feast that stretched into the night. But as the sun sank and cast that golden glow just as it had the day their story began, Coulter led Ada away from the noise and toward the cabin. Their cabin. Their home. They walked back in an easy silence, each aware of the weight of the moment of the life they were stepping into together. At the doorway, Coulter Hayes paused and turned to Ada Rose with a smile that made her breath hitch. "Mrs. Hayes," he murmured, the name still new on her ears, yet sweet as honey. "I reckon there's a tradition I ought to keep." Before Ada could answer, he swept her off her feet, cradling her against his chest just as he had the day wild hogs had thundered after her and fate had thrown them together. She laughed, joy spilling out of her, as he carried her across the threshold into the little cabin they had prepared with their own hands. "Welcome home," Coulter whispered, cupping her face in his calloused palms. "Home," she echoed the word thick with promise. "Wherever you are, that's home to me." Their kiss marked the true beginning of their marriage, a vow sealed not just by words spoken in front of neighbors and kin, but by the joining of two souls beneath the Wyoming sky. Outside, the celebration still roared, but inside those walls, Ada and Coulter made their own quiet feast of love, bodies, and spirits, bound together with a devotion neither storm nor sorrow could ever undo. Later, as she rested against the steady thrum of his heartbeat, Ada recalled Pearl Fenwick's words, "Never yield to despair. Always seek, always strive." With Coulter's arms around her, and the vast, untamed prairie stretched out before them, Ada knew she would carry that creed into every day of their life together. 5 years passed. Ada stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, one hand pressed to the swell of her belly, the other shading her eyes as she watched Coulter teach their 4-year-old boy, Noah Hayes, how to ride his first pony. At her feet, little Millie June, just 2, arranged pebbles in patterns only she understood. Their 3rd child, Jed Boone, stirred inside her, a promise of tomorrow. The homestead had blossomed under their sweat and grit. Fields of wheat rippled toward the horizon. Cattle grazed the rolling hills, and the orchard they planted their first spring now bore fruit. A wooden bridge spanned the creek that split their land from Virgil Kane's tying together blood and soil. Virgil still lived in the old family house, while Ephraim Doolin had married and claimed the eastern acres. Zeke Hollis had surprised them all, leaving for the east to study medicine, chasing the dream of healing after seeing too much sickness steal good folks away. As Ada took in the sight of her children, her husband, and the land they'd built up from nothing, she marveled at how life's most terrifying moment had led to such joy. If not for those wild hogs, if not for Coulter's rifle that day, if not for the strong arm that had pulled her onto his saddle, none of this would exist. "What's on your mind?" Coulter asked, climbing the porch steps after setting Noah firmly back in the corral, with strict orders to stay there. "Hogs," Ada answered with a teasing smile, leaning into him as his arms circled both her and the child she carried. Coulter chuckled, warm and familiar. "That's an odd thought on such a fine morning." "Not really," she said, turning in his embrace. "I was just thinking how thankful I am they drove me straight into your path." His expression softened. He laid a hand on her rounded belly, grinning when Jed Boone kicked beneath his palm. "I reckon about that day a lot," he admitted. "How different life might have turned if I'd been trailing another track. Or if you'd run the other way. But you weren't. And I didn't," Ada said simply. "And now look at all we have." His kiss was as tender as the first they had shared, but deeper, now seasoned by years of trials, triumphs, and love. When he pulled back, his blue eyes, bright as the Wyoming sky, held hers with a fire that time could not dim. "And we always will," Coulter promised, as their children's laughter rang through the yard and the sun blessed the land they had built together. Ada believed him with all her heart. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you